there's a child sitting in the principal's office. Again, suspended for fighting, for talking back, for disruptive behavior, for being, as the report says, defiant and unwilling to follow basic rules. The principal looks at the parents and says what everyone's thinking. Your child has a behavior problem. But here's what nobody sees. This child isn't misbehaving. This child is communicating the only way they know how. Because somewhere along the way, this child learned something devastating. Their words don't matter, their feelings don't count. The only way to be seen is to be a problem. And if you want to understand why some children become rebels, why they push back, act out, refuse to comply, you need to understand the moment they stop believing anyone would listen. This isn't a story about bad kids. It's a story about invisible pain that got loud enough to finally be noticed. And what we call rebellion is often just a child desperately trying to say something is wrong and nobody is listening. Rebellion doesn't start with defiance. It starts with disappointment. Picture this. You're 7 years old. You try to tell your parents something important, something that scared you, hurt you, confused you. And they're distracted, or dismissive, or they minimize it. You're overreacting. It's not that bad. Stop being so dramatic. So you try again. Louder this time, more insistent. And they get annoyed. I don't have time for this right now. Why are you always so difficult? Can't you see I'm busy? So you try a third time. But now you're angry because you've learned that calm doesn't work, that expressing needs politely gets you ignored. And this time, when you're loud, when you're disruptive, when you're behaving badly, they finally pay attention. Not kind attention, angry attention, punishing attention, but attention nonetheless. And your brain makes a devastating calculation. Being good gets me ignored. Being bad gets me seen. This is the moment rebellion is born. Not from badness, not from lack of discipline, from a child learning that disruption is the only language adults understand. Because here's the truth nobody talks about. Most problem children aren't trying to be difficult, they're trying to be heard. They've learned that good behavior makes them invisible, that compliance means their pain doesn't matter, that the only way to make adults care is to become a problem big enough that they can't ignore. So they act out, they talk back, they break rules. Not because they're bad, but because negative attention feels better than no attention at all. And with every punishment, every label, every time they're called difficult or defiant or out of control, the pattern deepens. Because they learn, I told you something was wrong, and you punished me for saying it, so I'll say it louder. And the cycle begins. Subscribe if you believe rebellion is often communication. Let me tell you what's really happening when a child is labeled rebellious. Teachers see a child who won't follow instructions, who disrupts class, who challenges authority. Parents see a child who talks back, who won't do homework, who argues about everything. Everyone sees a behavior problem. But here's what they don't see. The child who tried to express their needs appropriately and was shut down again and again and again. Because rebellion doesn't emerge in a vacuum. It emerges when a child's legitimate needs for connection, validation, autonomy, and respect are chronically unmet. Psychologists call this oppositional defiant disorder, but that label misses the point entirely. Because it pathologizes the child's response without examining what they're responding to. In The Explosive Child by Dr. Ross Greene, he revolutionized our understanding of difficult behavior with one simple insight. Kids do well if they can. If they're not doing well, something is getting in the way. Meaning, Children don't choose to be difficult. They become difficult when they lack the skills to handle their environment or when their environment is fundamentally failing to meet their needs. Think about it. What kind of environment creates rebellious children? One where their emotions are dismissed as too much. Their questions are met with, "Because I said so." Their autonomy is crushed by rigid control. Their individuality is treated as inconvenience. Their pain is invisible until it explodes. And then we wonder why they rebel. But here's what's truly heartbreaking. Rebellious children aren't trying to destroy authority. They're trying to reclaim their voice. Because somewhere along the way, their voice was taken from them. Their needs were invalidated. Their selfhood was denied. And rebellion is what happens when a silenced person finally finds their scream. It's not pretty. It's not convenient. It doesn't follow the rules. But it's honest. And sometimes honesty looks like chaos. Not all rebellious children rebel for the same reasons. There are distinct patterns, and understanding them reveals what the child is actually fighting against. Let's start with the autonomy rebel. This child had every aspect of their life controlled. What to wear, what to eat, how to feel, who to be friends with, what activities to do. Their parents meant well. They wanted to guide them, to keep them safe, to help them make good choices. But what the child experienced was suffocation. Every decision made for them, every preference overridden, every attempt at independence crushed. So they learned, the only way to have any control over my life is to refuse what's given to me. They say no to everything, not because the thing itself is bad, but because saying yes means surrendering the last bit of agency they have. Now, as teenagers or adults, they're oppositional by default. They resist anything that feels like control, even when it's in their best interest. Because their rebellion isn't about the specific rule. It's about reclaiming autonomy that was stolen. The next is the invalidation rebel. This child was told their feelings were wrong. You're not really upset. You're overreacting. There's no reason to feel that way. Their emotional reality was constantly denied. Their pain was dismissed. Their joy was minimized. So they learned, the only way to prove my feelings are real is to make them impossible to ignore. They escalate. They dramatize. They explode. Not because they're attention-seeking, but because understated pain has never been validated. Now, as teenagers or adults, their emotions feel too big because they learned that small emotions get dismissed. They haven't learned emotional regulation not because they're incapable, but because no one ever helped them practice feeling feelings at normal volumes. Type 3, the injustice rebel. This child witnessed or experienced unfairness that nobody acknowledged. Maybe they were scapegoated. Maybe their sibling got preferential treatment. Maybe their parents' rules were arbitrary and inconsistent. And when they pointed it out, that's not fair. They were told, life isn't fair. Deal with it. So they learned, authority doesn't mean fairness. Rules don't mean justice. So why should I respect either? They became the child who questions everything, who argues every rule, who refuses to comply just because an adult said so. Not because they're trying to be difficult, but because they learned that authority can be unjust, and unjust authority doesn't deserve automatic obedience. Now, as teenagers or adults, they're allergic to arbitrary rules. They need to understand the why before they'll comply. And when treated as if obedience itself is the goal, they rebel harder. The next type is the visibility rebel. This child was functionally invisible. Their parents were present but checked out. Physically there, but emotionally absent. The child tried everything to connect, being good, being helpful, achieving, excelling. None of it got them truly seen. So they learned, the only way to make them look at me is to become a problem they can't ignore. They started acting out, and suddenly their parents were paying attention. Negative attention, sure, but it was attention. Now, as teenagers or adults, they've internalized that love and conflict are intertwined, that being noticed means being a problem. They create drama not because they enjoy chaos, but because calm has always meant abandonment. In Hold On to Your Kids by Dr. Gordon Neufeld, he explains that children need to feel connected to their parents more than they need to be disciplined by them. When connection is missing, discipline doesn't work, because the child isn't trying to learn, they're trying to be seen. Here's what every parent, every teacher, every authority figure gets wrong. They think punishment will fix rebellious behavior. Stricter rules, harsher consequences, more control. But here's the truth. Punishment doesn't stop rebellion. It fuels it. Because rebellion isn't about the child wanting to misbehave. It's about the child needing something they're not getting. And when you punish them for expressing that need, you're teaching them, your needs don't matter. Your pain is invalid. The problem is you. So what do? They escalate. Because if gentle communication doesn't work, if calm expression gets ignored, if being good makes them invisible, then maybe being worse will finally make someone care enough to help. This is why traditional discipline fails with rebellious children. Because discipline addresses behavior, not the wound underneath. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. You've covered the symptom, but the injury is still there and getting worse. In No Drama Discipline by Dr. Daniel Siegel, he explains that punishment activates the child's threat response, flooding their brain with stress hormones that make learning impossible. When a child is in threat mode, they can't reflect, can't connect cause and effect, can't develop better coping skills. They can only defend themselves. And for many rebellious children, defense looks like doubling down on the behavior. You think I'm bad? I'll show you bad. Not consciously. But that's what the nervous system does when attacked. But here's where it gets truly dark. The more a child is punished for rebellious behavior, the more they internalize the identity. I am a problem child. I am bad. I am unlovable. And once that identity forms, the behavior becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. They don't try to be good because they've learned, I'm bad no matter what I do, so why bother? This is learned helplessness, and it's devastating. Because the child who started out just needing connection, validation, autonomy, or fairness ends up believing they're fundamentally defective, that there's something wrong with them, that they deserve punishment. And that belief follows them into adulthood, shaping every relationship, every job, every moment of their life. Share this with every parent using punishment to fix rebellion. Subscribe if you believe wounds need healing, not punishment. Let me translate rebellious behavior for you. Because what looks like defiance is often communication in a language adults have forgotten how to speak. When a child says, "You can't make me," what they're really saying, I have no control over anything in my life. This is the only power I have. When a child says, I don't care, what they're really saying, I care so much it's unbearable. And pretending not to care is the only way to protect myself from more disappointment. When a child says, you don't understand, what they're really saying, I've tried to explain, and every time you minimized it or dismissed it, so now I'm giving up trying to make you see. When a child says, I hate you, what they're really saying, I'm so hurt by you, and I don't have the emotional vocabulary to express pain except through rage. When a child refuses to do homework, clean their room, follow basic instructions, what they're really saying, something is overwhelming me, and I don't know how to ask for help. In The Whole Brain Child by Dr. Daniel Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, they explain that children don't have fully developed prefrontal cortexes. They literally can't articulate complex emotional states. They can't say, I'm feeling invalidated and powerless, which is triggering my threat response. So they communicate through behavior. And adults, instead of decoding the message, punish the messenger. But here's what happens when adults finally learn to translate. Instead of saying, go to your room, they say, I see you're really upset. Let's figure out what's going on. Instead of, why are you always so difficult? They ask, what do you need right now that you're not getting? Instead of power struggles over control, they offer choices. Do you want to do homework now or in 30 minutes? And something remarkable happens. The rebellion often dissolves. Not because the child suddenly became better behaved, but because the need underneath the behavior was finally met. Because rebellious children aren't fighting against rules, they're fighting for their humanity, for the right to have feelings, for the right to have agency, for the right to be seen as a full person, not just a behavior to manage. And when those rights are respected, the fight often ends. Here's something nobody tells you about rebellious children. They're often the healthiest people in sick systems. While everyone else is pretending everything's fine, the rebellious child is saying, no, this is not okay. While everyone else is keeping the peace at the cost of their authenticity, the rebellious child refuses to sacrifice themselves for fake harmony. They're the one pointing out, the emperor has no clothes. This family is dysfunctional. These rules are unjust. And for that honesty, they're labeled the problem. But the truth is, they're not the problem. They're the symptom of the problem. In dysfunctional families, there's often one child who becomes the identified patient, the one everyone points to as the source of all the family's issues. But family systems theory reveals something profound. That child is usually the healthiest member, because they're the only one refusing to pretend. They're the canary in the coal mine, reacting to toxicity everyone else is numbing themselves to. Think about it. In a family where emotions are forbidden, the child who expresses emotions loudly isn't sick, they're sane. In a family with arbitrary, unjust rules, the child who questions those rules isn't defiant, they're intelligent. In a family where children's autonomy is crushed, the child who fights for independence isn't difficult, they're developing normally. In The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate, he explains that what we call disorders in children are often healthy responses to disordered environments. The child isn't broken, the system is broken. And the child's rebellion is their attempt to survive it with their soul intact. But here's where the tragedy deepens. Because the rebellious child is labeled the problem, they often become the scapegoat. All family dysfunction gets projected onto them. The parents' failing marriage? If only our child weren't so difficult, we'd be fine. The sibling struggles? They take up all our energy. The family's emotional dysfunction? Everything was fine until they started acting out. And the child internalizes, I am the problem. Everything bad that happens is my fault. When the truth is, they're just the only one refusing to participate in the family's collective denial. And someday, maybe years later, maybe decades, that rebellious child will realize their rebellion wasn't pathology, it was integrity. It was their soul refusing to be silenced, their spirit refusing to be broken, their authenticity refusing to be erased. And that rebellion, that defiance, that refusal to comply, it saved them. Share this with every problem child who needs to hear they were never the problem. Subscribe if you believe rebellion can be integrity. We've diagnosed the wound. Now it's time to heal the wiring. In part 2, we will move beyond identification and into transformation. We will show the adult former problem child how their childhood survival strategies are now causing instability in relationships and careers. We will focus on the critical steps for healing, translating the fight response, recognizing when you're fighting a present threat versus an old ghost. The path to discernment, learning when to fight and when to choose cooperation without feeling like you're surrendering your selfhood. Practical healing steps, concrete, nervous system focused tools to finally make peace with the rebel, channeling that defiant energy into purpose, justice, and a stable, autonomous life. Don't let the survival mode of your past define your future. Click the notification bell so you don't miss part 2, where we learn how to honor the rebel without being controlled by the fight.